Yeah, let's go. All right, good morning, everyone. This is the endorsement interview for Congressional District 3. I'm Aaron Mesh, the news editor. Thanks to all of you in attendance. It's great to have you here. We're going to ask each of you some questions in order to get to know you and decide who we're going to endorse in this contest. It's not a debate, so we don't guarantee equal time. We may spend a little more time with each one of you than another because we may have follow-up questions or an area of inquiry we want to explore. Doesn't necessarily indicate the way our endorsement is going. It just means that that we want to ask.
Sure, it does.
Yeah, whoever gets the most questions asked getting our endorsement. That's the classic answer. No, in all seriousness, it just means that that we have questions and avenues we want to explore to better understand who we will endorse in this race. It's not a debate, and we ask that you not interrupt each other, but it is an opportunity for you to get to know one another a little bit, and so there may be points in which we ask the two of you to engage with each other's concepts and ideas. Without further ado, Congressman, if you could introduce yourself and tell folks what the new boundaries of your district are and why you're seeking re-election.
Well, my name is Earl Blumenauer. The 3rd Congressional District has been expanded to the east so that it includes all of Mount Hood River County, which is really kind of exciting. I've done work there for years, but never represented them. I'm running for re-election because while I'm proud of what we did this last Congress, and I have a packet of information that I'm happy to leave for your perusal, because it's really an amazing collection in terms of energy, infrastructure, chips. But that's not why I'm running. I'm running because the goal now is to be able to implement what we put in place. We have real challenges. We've talked about that here before in our community and nationally. I know who and I know how to be able to get stuff done. And that is my focus in terms of the implementation on things like infrastructure, housing, drug reform, which kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap. We can talk about that further if you like. But I'm proud of the leadership I've provided in Congress and Oregon in dealing in those areas. And there's no guarantee that we're going to get, for instance, our share of the infrastructure dollars, but we are positioned to be able to take advantage of the Biden administration's approach, and I'm looking forward to being able to help that happen.
Great. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Joanna Harber, and I'm a resident of Estacada, Oregon. And I'm a lawyer, and my current job is a caregiver for my mother. And is there anything else specific you want me to say, or? Well,
sure. Could you tell us a little, like, what party's nomination have you received, and why are you seeking this office?
What party denomination? Is that what you're saying?
What party nomination?
Party nomination. Okay, sorry. The volume's not very good on this, so forgive me. So I'm the Republican nominee for this race. And I ran because I believe it's time to have change. Representative Earl Blumenauer has been there for 26 years. I do thank him for his service. It's not easy to step up and run. It's not easy to put yourself out there and do this. And so I do appreciate those who have been willing to do this in the past and those who are willing to do it now. And thankfully there'll be people willing to do it in the future. But we have different views and different directions that we think the country needs to go, and so I'm running to represent the Republican Party and those who align with that philosophy.
Great, thank you. Nigel, got some questions?
So let's touch briefly on, you said you wouldn't mind talking about drug reform. So we've tried Measure 110 in this state. Hasn't gone particularly well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the problem is one of implementation. The philosophy of 110, and I was one of the few elected officials that was there campaigning for it, was to be able to decriminalize tiny amounts of illegal substances so that we could focus on people who are doing what is illegal. Measure 110 did not make it legal to sell drugs, to use them openly, to be able to simplify what law enforcement does, and was going to put some serious resources into drug rehabilitation. And you know Oregon has an abysmal record there. I'm appalled that we're just now getting the resources out. It's over a year late, but I'm pleased that there's at least $59 million for 41 projects. But it has not been handled well. And then there are those who use the notion that we've decriminalized a tiny portion of illegal substances as an excuse not to enforce and disrupt. I mean, you've chronicled what's going on in Dawson. That's not legal. And there's no reason why, even though we are stressed with law enforcement, that we can't intervene there and disrupt an open-air drug market. It's still illegal. And having the forces of the law enforcement to not focus on a tiny use for an occasional user, but instead deal with people who are dealing and doing things notorious. That should make it easier, not harder. And we haven't done that.
So you, way back when, sat on city council. What's the policy prescription here? Is it both for us to get the 110 money into treatment sooner, and also to activate the Portland Police Bureau and other police bureaus around the state?
It is all of the above. I mean, part of my frustration is that the federal government has been asleep at the switch in terms of not dealing with rationalizing our drug policies and allowing things in Southern Oregon, for instance, with the cartels. I mean, this is insidious. There is no substitute for having some actual enforcement from federal, state, and local authorities, being able to get the drug treatment out there. We had testimony, I think it was earlier this week, the professor from Stanford, who talked about how we ought to be moving, because you can use the tools to encourage, if not force people into recovery. It doesn't have to be passive. You don't have to just write a ticket and walk away. That is a sad misreading of what Measure 110 did. The other area that I am excited about, and I've been doing work with psilocybin, is that this is a therapy that offers the potential of breaking the cycle, for example, of meth addiction. The psilocybin use in terms of the clinical work that we've set the stage, I think can be transformational. And what we need to do is disrupt supplies. What we need to do is not focus on criminalizing behavior of people who are users, but we don't allow open, notorious use and sale. That is and should be illegal, and we don't have to accept it.
So you've, and we know that you've been involved in the drug policy discussion for decades in DC. You've just expressed strong opinions about local implementation. So tell us about city charter reform. What do you think of the proposal that's on the November ballot?
I'm not going to wade into that. I've been clear that there's going to be a lot of work that's going to be necessary, win or lose, after this. I want to be able to be somebody who's viewed as a resource to try and move forward. I don't have the bandwidth to dive into every single local election.
But Congressman, you sat on city council for 8 years.
10 years.
10 years. You just expressed very strong and knowledgeable opinions about local drug policy. Why don't you have an opinion about the charter?
I choose not to engage in this issue. I don't think I have much to add. There are pros and cons.
You're probably the best-known politician in the city.
I didn't draft it. I wasn't on the Charter Review Commission. I'm not somebody who is going to lead the charge one way or another. I can make arguments either way. I don't want to make arguments either way. What I said is there'll be, I think, regardless of the outcome, there's going to be a need to try and figure out how we refine and go forward. I've been clear that I want an administrator. I want districts. But the provisions here, I'm not going to wade in.
This is a confusing issue, and I think voters are looking for leadership and guidance on it from knowledgeable, trusted sources. such as you.
And it was written in a way that is confusing. I don't know about you. I find some of these things confusing. I've been quoted as saying that I think it's convoluted. It's hard to explain. I'm not going to be able to provide clarity given the time and the resources I have, and I don't think it's the best use of my time and energy, nor do I think in terms of any credibility that I have going forward in terms of city administration. I'd like to be there to help refine what goes forward.
Joanna, would you like to weigh in on Measure 110?
Measure 110, I think that was a mistake. Clearly, the intent was never fully implemented. It's my understanding that hardly anyone has actually entered rehab through that system. And so it needs to be relooked. We have a bunch of people who are struggling with drug addiction, and we need to help them and give them resources. And I think Measure 110 was an attempt to try and do that, but it failed. So it needs to be revisited and reworked, if not completely undone and start over.
Thank you. Congressman, we talked earlier this year about your efforts on Mount Hood. There were people on all sides of that. The timber industry had a particular view. The conservation industry or the conservation advocacy groups had a particular view. What's the status of that legislation now?
Well, we have some legislation that we've introduced. We've been working hard to be able to build consensus moving forward. We've got a special group that's working it sounds like a minor issue, but having the permanent restroom up there at Government Camp is huge in terms of the movement around the mountain and across the mountain. We hope that we'll have an opportunity in the lame duck session to be able to move it forward. We've been working with Native Americans.
Would you like to let another candidate in? Excuse me. This gentleman's been waiting outside for some time. Mr. Delk.
Oh yeah, come on.
Party.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Hello, how are you? Good to see you.
Sorry, go ahead, Congressman. So you're hoping to bring the bill back in the lame duck session?
Well, it is still pending, and the notion with the the Natural Resources Committee was if it had in the pipeline that it would be potentially considered, and we've been getting some positive feedback from committee staff and other stakeholders, and we're still hoping to move forward.
So give us a percentage chance of it passing in that lame duck session.
I can't pretend to. A lot of it will depend on what the outcome of the election is. It's very much up in the air, although I'm pleased to report that I think we've got some wind at our back in terms of the election, making it more likely that Democrats might be able to hold on in the House. But your guess is as good as mine. I've never seen a situation as fluid and challenging as what we're facing, although I like how it's been moving in our direction recently.
Okay.
Mr. Delk, we're pleased to have you here. Sorry about the confusion at the door.
Well, no, it's my confusion because I thought your address was 1220 Northwest Quimby, so I took the bus there and then I had to walk up here, so I really apologize.
Well, we're glad to have you here now.
Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself and tell us the party nomination you have and why you're seeking this office?
So my name's David Delk, and I am the candidate for the Oregon Progressive Party with a cross nomination from the Pacific Green and the Independent Party. And I'm seeking this, well, I'm not really, I'm on the ballot because I have a message, and I don't have any belief that I'm going to displace him from Congress, nor do I really have any desire to. My message is that Representative Blumenauer, as almost all other members of Congress, frequently vote yes for the national defense budget, the war budget. And they almost universally are never questioned by the press about why they do that, and they give no statements about why they do that, either for or against. And so I would just like to get this conversation going a little bit so that the press possibly might ask a question.
So is your big issue reducing the defense budget?
It is, yes, right. And my voters pamphlet statement says that I would vote for no defense budget that is not less than 50% of the prior years. So dramatic.
You mean every year it'd have to be 50% of the prior year?
That would be the logical conclusion at some point. Well, then you
To
stop.
diminish it down to zero?
No, I'm not suggesting we go to zero, but I am suggesting that dramatic decreases in the war budget are necessary.
One slight clarification. I don't vote for the defense budget. I voted against virtually everyone since I've been in Congress, and my record has material in terms of why. For example, the grotesque amount that we're spending on nuclear weapons, $1.2 trillion over the next 30 years. So I think the record is pretty consistent, pretty clear. I give some of my friends on that committee heartburn because even though we're making some progress in terms of unexploded ordnance or what we do with refugees, I don't support the budget and have it.
All
You
right.
can
Well,
check that out.
I appreciate that exchange. Anthony, do you have any questions?
As one of your colleagues who's running for the 6th congressional district has talked about eschewing all trading in individual stocks. Where are you on that?
I haven't traded individual stocks for decades. I co-sponsor legislation that comes forward. I'll vote for it.
Your disclosure forms show that your wife regularly trades in individual stocks.
My wife has an advisor who manages it without direction from her, and you can verify that with the advisor. It is autopilot. She has somebody who manages her portfolio. We don't discuss it. The manager does that. I made the mistake of employing the manager to manage my portfolio without giving instructions that I don't deal with individual stocks. As soon as I found out that they bought some individual stocks for me, I sold them instantly at a loss.
Congressman,
I never have, and I don't.
Congressman, we're aware of that mistake and you acknowledged it, but you're aware that there are some proposals that members of Congress are talking about that I believe would ban the sort of trading that you and your wife are currently engaged in. And I think the question is, do you support that?
I co-sponsored the Stock Act, and if that comes before us for a vote, I will vote for it. It's not an issue with me. That's why for years I haven't. And I'm sort of flummoxed that somehow something became an issue because I didn't give explicit instructions.
But the appearance of your wife, and we would take you at your word that her advisor acts
And
independently.
you can contact the advisor and find out how they management. She doesn't consult with them.
There are many people in public life who put their money into mutual funds to avoid
Right.
that potential
Right.
appearance of conflict. Why not do that?
I think given this kerfluffle, that's probably, I mean, that's what I do. That's probably what she will do. She's horrified that somehow that she becomes the object of something where she never did anything with the advisor. And I'm sure she would have no problem with that. And if the legislation comes forward, I'll vote for it. But I've fully disclosed for decades. And so the notion that somehow, I mean, it's just
You just made that you ended up on that list in the Times.
because of
They did that,
because
yeah.
of a mistake that I didn't give instructions to the advisor not to deal with individual stocks. As soon as I found out about it, I instructed sell them at a loss, and that I don't do that. It's my past practice. It'll be my future practice.
How did it come to your attention? It didn't come to your attention in the paper, did it? It must have come to your attention some other way because you sold them before those stories ran,
That
right?
we have a report that we put out, and as the report was put together, I found there were individual stocks in it.
A report from your advisor, her advisor.
No, it's an ethics report.
Oh, okay, an ethics report.
And
You were like,
I was going, what? And so I
Was it a defense company stock too, if I remember?
I don't know what
Yeah,
they
that's
were.
ironic.
I didn't do it. I didn't
Yeah.
know about it.
Yeah.
When I found out about it, we sold them. And this, for 25 years or more, is the only episode. And it was a mistake. And it's pretty clear before, pretty clear after. But people draw their own conclusions. I'm proud of the transparency that I've done. Anyway.
Joanna, I'd like to turn to you for a moment. If elected, what's the first bill you'd introduce in Congress?
The first bill I'd introduce in Congress on my own would probably be to end the let it burn practice. There are so many bills, so it's kind of hard to pick which one would be the first. But in 2020, we all remember the wildfires that devastated this region. And it was because of that let it burn practice that also happened in 2014, a similar wildfire. And the forestry department just lets things burn until it gets close to people and livestock and things like that. And I'd like to end that practice because I believe we need to keep the forest maintained for wildlife, for our use and everything. And having wildfires like that is not helpful. And I think that is something that I could actually get bipartisan support on. And it's something that I could actually get across and get through. Some of the other ideas I have may not be quite as easy to get through as that particular one.
Now, you're in Estacada. I'm assuming you've seen the effects of the burn policy firsthand.
Correct.
Tell us
During
about
that wildfire in 2020, I was evacuated from my own home for 26 days. It came within a fourth mile. Several community members lost their home, and across the state, hundreds of people lost their homes in the year 2020. And so we need to do better with forest management as a whole. And I would actually like to get to local forest management instead of federal management, because people who are on the ground knows what's going on, and they have a more priority interest in making sure that it is maintained well so that it can be used for all uses, such as hiking, the wildlife, logging, all those things. And I would prefer to have, and I think it should be local control instead of federal government control.
how large a role did that issue and that experience play in your decision to run for Congress?
I was actually running for Congress when the 2020 incident happened. So I don't think it played a role because I was already running in 2020. I think it has kind of helped me decide kind of things that I think I could actually get through Congress and passed. Congress is a very partisan organization right now, and things are usually done strictly on party lines. And so the makeup of Congress is going to depend on what you're going to get through right now, whether it's more Democrat or Republican. And so, but that is one issue that I think actually reaches across lines and can get support and get passed. And that will help people in the 3rd Congressional District, especially those close to the Mountain region.
Congressman, could you talk a little bit about, you've been working on legalization at the federal level, legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes. Can you give us an update on that?
We are closer than we've ever been to sort of getting this across the finish line. In the past, we've passed a number of provisions just to linger in Mitch McConnell's hospice for cannabis in the Senate. This time we had Senate leadership, the result of those elections in Georgia, where we have Senate leadership now that supports reform. Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, our own Ron Wyden. They've been working on a provision that would take the Safe Banking Act that we passed and deal with some criminal justice elements to add to it. We've also had a research bill that's passed, and it got swept up because John Cronin was cranky that some of his bills weren't passing, so he put holds on everything. Mm-hmm. But the research bill should have passed, and that will be a tremendous opportunity. We have tens of thousands of people every week who fail drug tests, not because they're impaired, but because they smoked marijuana in the last month or two. An opportunity to get that passed I think is significant. The banking bill is teed up and ready to go with those provisions. Conversations I've had in recent weeks, last week, with Chuck Schumer, with Cory Booker, with Ron Wyden, makes me think that we're going to be in pretty good shape. Senator Feinstein and Senator Grassley are aligned with us on the research bill, and I think there's a real good chance this is going to happen in the lame duck.
Are there House Republicans who are with you, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We organized a bipartisan cannabis caucus, late Don Young, but Dave Joyce, Nancy Mace from South Carolina. There are a number of Republicans who have come around. The bill that we passed for safe banking had over 90 Republicans that voted for it. So this in Congress is not intensely partisan other than with Senate Republican leadership. And if we can break it through, it will pass on the floor, and people, I think, will be surprised at the breadth of the support.
What do you attribute McConnell's resistance? Is it law enforcement? Is it because he wants to protect the tobacco industry?
I don't know. I am mystified because there is keen interest in the state of Kentucky, and we've actually worked a little bit so that some of these former tobacco farmers could move into the hemp space. There's great interest in his state. In fact, the majority of Republicans now support full legalization, and when it's medical marijuana, it's like the 4th of July.
Well, isn't the concern the unintended consequences we've seen in Southern Oregon and Northern California?
Well, that is not an unintended consequence. That is a result of failed federal policy. The federal government is not focusing on being able to deal with those challenges. There's no reason that we should allow the cartels to operate on federal land, but this is a result of not having uniform federal policy. The crime that we see robbing dispensary is a result that the federal government cannot get its head around the notion that everybody knows that this should not be an all-cash business. You know, the realtors, the bankers, everybody agrees. But what we're having in terms of these problems is a result of the abject failure of having a federal policy. If we had a uniform federal policy, we wouldn't have an imbalance of supply and demand. We would be able to send this surplus cannabis into the stream of commerce rather than having amazing incentives to go into a black market. It's the failure of the federal government to have a policy to regulate and tax. And when we are able to get these bills enacted, it's going to have a very dramatic change very quickly. We no longer have bootleggers anymore, despite the fact that there's a pretty high tax on alcohol. Yet the opportunity costs are not worth the risks.
Congressman, we need to move on. We're running out of time. One question. Hurricane Ian reminded me of the fact that for years, maybe decades, you have been talking about, maybe you have even sponsored legislation to remove federal subsidies for people living in floodplains. I'm just wondering if you continue to feel that way. Has your effort gotten any headwind?
Yes, it
You've
has.
been making this clarion call for years.
It has, and in fact, I just issued a report, it may be there, in terms of disasters, updating the work that I've done. I mean, in terms of the experience we had here with our wildfires. You know, it's kind of, I did not realize this till I started working on this report. FEMA has no responsibility for extreme heat. That's not part of the bailiwick.
But for our viewers, I want to make clear, you have been suggesting for some time that people who live in floodplains who get federally subsidized flood insurance should not get that federally subsidized flood
But
insurance.
they ought to pay appropriate costs. We need to update the flood maps, the same way that we ought to deal with fire hazards here in Oregon.
And is the consequence of that in your mind that the market will rule and it will encourage people not to live in those areas?
The extent to which people bear the costs of their individual decisions, it will impact them. You're going to see some of it now in Florida because of the collapse of their insurance market.
They just won't insure.
Their insurance is not available or it's prohibitively expensive. They're being forced to have modern building code standards, which is going to make a little bit of a difference there. But as a practical matter, we still have people behaving in ways that are reckless. The largest area of residential development in the United States over the last 20 years is in the urban-rural interface. The most dangerous place to build has seen the most rapid expansion of homes. And so the federal government needs to get its policy straight. In some instances, we are paying for people to move back into floodplains. So it's something that I have worked on.
My guess is you're never going to run for mayor of New Orleans.
Safe. Yeah. No.
Joanna, I'd love to have you respond to that, given your interest in this topic.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. Was the question regarding insurance and flood zones?
Mark, you want to pose the
It's
question?
just whether or not the federal government ought to be subsidizing people who live in areas that are at high risk, either because of their proximity to wildfires or because they live in a floodplain. But, you know, right now, if you live in a floodplain, you can get insurance that's subsidized for the federal government, so when the hurricane comes and wipes your home out, taxpayers are basically paying to replace your home. And Congressman Blumenauer has been advocating against that for some time, so I think Aaron just wants to know how you feel about it.
So when it comes to something that's currently in place, you can't like take it away from somebody because they were there with the understanding that they would have that protection. So to take it away from them when they had it, I think would be unfair. Looking at it in the future, our country does have a deficit. We are spending more money than we have, and so we do need to start looking at ways in which we can fix that. So looking at futures, in the future, I would look into and probably support limiting that to some extent, depending on current information, as flood zones change and all that area and everything changes. So I would not be opposed to investigating to see where we can start to limit that, because we can't just keep spending and spending on things that clearly have consequences. So
Great, thank you.
So I'd like to take this opportunity, unless you have further questions, to ask each of you if you'd like to ask your opponent, one of your opponents a question. David, I'll start with you.
First of all, I'd like to say that I probably, with the exception of this war budget, agree with Mr. Blumenauer probably close to 100%. He does, I think he does a really excellent job of representing our Portlanders, Multnomah County residents in Congress. So I'll say that. And with that, and I was not expecting again a question, the ability to ask a question, so I haven't really thought about it.
You don't have to ask one, we're just giving you the opportunity.
Well, I feel an obligation to ask one, but I really can't come up with one.
Okay, well, I tell you what, we'll move on, and if you come back to one in 30 seconds.
Okay.
Joanna, a question for either of your opponents?
Yes, I'd like to ask Representative Earl Blumenauer if he supports the defunding of the police. He mentioned that there's not enough police to respond to drug issues and other issues, and crime has gone skyrocketed in Portland. And I want to know if he supports the defunding of the police that has already taken place and need any further defunding.
Are you talking about the defunding of the police in the city of Portland?
I'm talking about overall, like.
You want to know if, as a general matter, he supports the idea of defunding the police? Yes or no question?
No.
No. Do you have a question? For either of your opponents? Okay, so we have a fun question to end this with, right?
The fun question is as follows, and Congressman, you're familiar with the fun question. It's at least fun for us. I think this one's actually fun for everybody this time around. And that is, if you had one last night on Earth, what's the one food you have to have?
Not
for
a meal.
Not a full meal, not the full menu. What's the one thing that has to be on the menu for your last meal?
My last meal. Well, more than what's on the menu, it's where. If I just had one last meal, picking some of these restaurants in Portland,
One food item.
lasagna.
There you go.
Lovely.
There you go.
David?
I think I would pick something that was vegetarian, but I can't think of particular, I don't have any overriding desire for something.
All right,
Joanne, how about you?
That's funny. Gluten-free lasagna would probably be my pick. So just to make it different.
We have found common ground
Look at
here
this.
today.
We have found a consensus across the aisle.
Thank you all for coming in. We really appreciate it, and good luck to you all.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
everyone.
for having me. I appreciate it.
Congressman, do you have 2 minutes to hang around? I've got a couple of other questions unrelated to this race.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for letting me
Thank
come
you
in.
so much. Of course. I'll walk you out.
Okay.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no.
Keep up the good work.
Yes,
Mark. I
thank you.
appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. And,
Look after that Achilles.
That is cool.
What
I
is
know.
We have
Bikes in common?
the Trek Portland model.
Oh. Disc brakes?
Yeah. They designed it really well.
So here,
for-
shut the door, Anthony. You can stay in. I just want to, and we're running the camera. I want to try to get you, I know that as a general matter, you don't want to get involved in making comments about local government, but I'm going to try. First of all, I've never thought of you as a clothes horse. That is a beautiful fucking blazer. That's like a Mark Hatfield
I like that
quality
blazer, too.
jacket. Okay, here's why I want to talk to you. On a regular basis over the last 30 years, we do these endorsement interviews, and if Nigel was here, he would tell you he groans because I bring up this thing called Resolution A, which you are the author of, and you and I may be the only people on earth who remember what it is, and I'll now inform Anthony. And basically, and I want you to clarify me, but I want to try to get you on the record about it because I think remembering the genius of that is more important now than ever because so much of what I believe is wrong is that we've got too many governments doing too many overlapping things, and the housing is the perfect example. I'm not sure if it matters if Deborah Kafori and Ted Wheeler can't stand each other if one of them had the responsibility for housing. So, the camera's on. Can you remind people what the intent of Resolution A was and whether or not it's being practiced in spirit?
Resolution A was a strategy in the early 80s
When you were Multnomah County,
when I was a Multnomah County Commissioner,
right.
which was a reaction to a failed effort at city-county consolidation. That looked like it was a little too much for the voters to accept at that time. My endorsement enabled it to get only go down 2-1 in my legislative district. But people understood that we had too many governments doing too much. Resolution A was in an effort to have functional consolidation, to split between the city and the county specific functions. The county would deal with human resources and county-wide services like libraries. The city would deal with municipal law enforcement. It would deal with things like sewers, roads. We worked to allocate road responsibilities more rationally and allow the city of Portland to control all of its roads within its boundaries. It was an effort, the functional consolidation, to make it more efficient.
And that resolution was passed
Yes.
by the county?
By the county, and it was embraced by the city council with Mayor Frank Ivancy. And it enabled us to rationalize service delivery. The city of Portland got out got into providing law enforcement in the urbanized areas of Multnomah County to the east, and it enabled Gresham to expand to the west. It enabled the road departments to stop working around each other and to concentrate, for example, on the bridges. Over the years, the principle eroded some, that the county never really got out of local road activities. The city never really entirely got out of social services. The pressures continued. But I think the notion that undergirded the Resolution A to try and have specific functions that made sense broadly makes sense.
I mean, again, I just want to know whether you agree or disagree with the notion that it strikes me that the spirit of Resolution A has been forgotten and completely abandoned. And for the first time in my memory, what this region's challenges are not a lack of money. We have been very generous at taxing ourselves. What we have are governments that literally don't get along and things aren't happening.
I think there's an argument to be made to that extent, but it goes beyond just governments. We have a plethora of organizations. I was outraged that the Paramount Apartments that are down across from the Coliseum and near the headquarters of the school district,
Blanchard Building.
about 70 units that was cost contained. People had a chance to buy the Paramount Apartments and retain the public ownership and the restrictions on rents. The people who tried to find a bridge loan, I think it was $13 million, to be able to secure the purchase. There was nobody, with all of the folks that were involved, there was nobody that could authorize a $13 million bridge loan to retain that affordable housing.
Right.
And as a result, it was purchased by the private sector and the rents are going up.
As you look at the housing issue, can you identify what the county should be doing, what the city should be doing or not doing, who ought to have primary responsibility? Or break it down, who should have primary responsibility for building housing, who should have a primary responsibility for shelters?
I think there is wisdom in having a housing authority for the region, or at least the city and county. One housing authority.
Like the joint office?
A housing authority that actually gets there, not just coordinating, but one entity that provides the housing services.
Okay.
I would like to see, going back to the spirit of Resolution A, I would like to see one regional mental health authority. It's all state money anyway, and it shouldn't be, the city of Portland, Multnomah County, Washington County, Clackamas County, having a single entity that provides these mental health services.
Have we created too many layers of government? I mean, remember Vicatia? He wanted Willamette County.
Yeah, well, I had legislation, you may recall, back in the day.
I don't remember. To do that?
I wanted to have nine counties instead of the 36 that God created.
I can't tell you how many conversations we're having in which they're arguing about it's the county's fault, it's the city's fault. And I've just never experienced it.
Well, but I would say there's another element here, and that is there are more and more people who are seeking, in the name of greater representation, to have their fingers in this. It's well intended. They think they have a vision, but you have so many people who are involved with various aspects of housing, for just to pick one.
You taking a public position on charter reform?
No,
We did this.
Yeah, I plan on helping when it's done to zero in on where we go from there. I believe in single-member districts. As city executive, I didn't design this one. I'm not going to try and explain it. I don't have the bandwidth to do
Okay.
it.
If re-elected, will this be your last term?
It depends on how much fun I'm having and how much good I can do.
How much fun are you having?
This has been an amazing, and particularly the last 3 months. I've gotten stuff that I've been pounding away on for years in terms of, I didn't go into it here, but in terms of what happened with the energy provisions, the infrastructure. I mean, I've been the infrastructure finance guy beating the drum. We've got $558 billion plus another $500 billion. But the issue is going to be, can we implement it? And that's my focus, is being able to help people get their hands on that money and do it right with an equitable, low-carbon future. Because this legislation and this administration really supports what we're trying to do, and we're going to have to do a good job to make clear that we're the right receptacle for that money.
Did you happen to read his cover story about the Clatskanie biodiesel?
No.
Oh God, you need to read this. It's a Music Man story about this guy who's trying to take over the town of Clatskanie.
I can send you the link, or
with tax credits. I mean, it is really, you'll find it fascinating.
Is this Harold Hill?
Yeah, exactly. It is a Music Man all over again.
Well, I will look forward to it.
What happened with Joe Manchin that break loose? And how did you feel when that happened? I mean, that's a TikTok I would like to read, you know?
Exhilaration. I mean, Joe Manchin at core is a populist. And he supports a number of these things, and he represents one of the poorest states in the Union. And there was some stuff maybe that he needed to get out of his system. I had a great conversation with him. I mean, he is reveling in this moving forward. He thought he could get some leverage dealing with permitting reform. And we can identify with the need of being able to have transmission, which is a challenge.
Gas? The gas lines?
Well,
electricity?
Electricity.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and this is a fascinating breakthrough, because I think it could lead to some other items. But I kept thinking something would happen, and it never did, and it never did, and all of a sudden, the dam broke. And it was just exhilaration,
Oregon congressional races, I assume Salinas is going to be okay. Jamie McLeod Skinner, it looks like that's sort of neck and neck. Boy, have those two people gone after each other with negative ads. I don't know if you're seeing any of that in DC, but it's really nasty. I assume that's going to be the closest one. And I assume Val's okay, but I saw a poll that only had her up 1 point.
Yeah, I don't think we've got real good research on this stuff. And this is the most fluid situation I've ever seen. But this Dobbs decision just unleashed tremendous energy, and it's put the Republicans back on their back legs. The dog caught the mail truck, and it ran over them. So I think it comes down to execution. It's the gubernatorial race is closer than I would like to see. I think at the end, Tina's in reasonably good shape, but it's not clear.
I think she's got this.
People just can't take things for granted.
Yeah.
You think what?
I think Tina's got this. It's extraordinary, though, that after Phil Knight spent $20 million, Betsy is, 2 points below who she was when they started. I mean, I actually kind of feel bad for the guy. Well, seriously, you spend all that money and you go backwards?
But Phil is on a losing streak in terms of major investments that he's made politically. And it perplexes me, because they used to be a little more progressive, and I think his instincts in many cases are pretty good. This is troubling. Betsy, part of it is, I think, and I like her. I mean, I went to law school with her. Her father was a big supporter of mine. We served in the legislature together. Yeah, Sam was a great friend, and she's got a wicked sense of humor. But this is a reflection, I think, that Betsy historically has been on the offense in the legislature, kind of a wrecking ball, getting rid of things we could do in terms of environment, and the gun safety has come back to bite her. And she hasn't built a reservoir of personal connections, even though she is, in casual conversation, she's amusing and she's smart.
I think the polling is showing that people like her, they just don't trust her. That's what the polling is.
You're a step ahead of me. I haven't seen this.
Okay. Thank you.
No, it's good to see you.
So when you do at some point